And what did Chief Sloly say was the basis for allowing the heavy trucks in, or having to allow the heavy trucks in?
Well, at the time, I believe Chief Sloly and others were talking about whether they had the legal authority to prevent the trucks from coming into the streets based on their charter rights. And that was the rationale that I had heard at the time. There was also the operational aspect based on the assumption that they were going to leave, that keeping the footprint contained would be more beneficial to the police to be able to manage the crowds and not spread the resources too thin, because it always is a challenge for resources. They also felt that from an egress point of view, it would facilitate an egress when the protest was over, because then they could guide them out of the city from one place rather than having to manage it in terms of multiple places all over the city if the trucks happen to be parked there. No, based on my experience, that was pretty normal to have a variety. Almost every protest we've had, whether it was the G8, G20, the farmers' protest, the numbers vary widely leading into the actual protest event. That is a normal situation in my experience.
Okay, so you were confident then that the city was prepared and that OPS was prepared?
I was confident that we were prepared for that first weekend with the assumption that they were leaving after the weekend.
And so how did that first weekend go in terms of what you expected and what actually happened?
Well, based on the assumption that they were going to leave after the weekend, we all thought it went quite well. There wasn't any violence. People were protesting. It was managed. There were no major incidents that weekend, other than the honking. There was a disruption to the neighborhoods, but from the perspective of if they would have left after that weekend, it probably would have been very much an insignificant event compared to what it turned out to be.
Now, there are documents that suggest that the city was upset about certain incidences that weekend, such as the National War Memorial being desecrated, the Terry Fox statue as well. Did that raise any concern for you?
No, we were concerned, obviously, by some of those behaviors and what happened. But in my timeline, if it would have ended after the weekend, they were unfortunate incidents, and they were dealt with, and everybody would have moved on, and we would have cleaned up the city heading into the following week. So from the perspective of was that first weekend managed perfectly? They never are. Were there incidents? There always are. Was there any extreme violence or anybody seriously injured? No. Was there incredible disruption to the people that lived in downtown, and other people were disrupted by the physical presence of the vehicles, the noise, the fumes? Absolutely. But in my window, 3 days of that, we could have got past that.
Letters, Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson is going to declare a local emergency in the city of Ottawa at 4:30 p.m. The expressed intent of this declaration is to put pressure on the Premier to exercise powers to resolve this. So you said in the meeting that that was the intention of the state of emergency.
Yes.
And what kind of pressure were you hoping to put on the province?
Well, up at that point, the province was taking the posture that this is a law enforcement issue, and that Ottawa Police should be dealing with the Ottawa Police Chief should be dealing with the other police chiefs and the OPP commissioner, and to get the resources they needed, and that they weren't going to get involved politically. We were hoping that they would exercise powers around, through the Ministry of Transportation and other legislation that they had. I don't know the extent of what they had at their disposal, but through their regulations, to be able to put more pressure on the protesters to try and help us end it. And so the provincial legislation, the Premier has a lot more authority in terms of powers once he or she declares an emergency. And at that point, they hadn't declared. I think they declared after around when Windsor
on the 11th.
On the 11th.
And so was part of this then an effort for was this trying to encourage the province or to signal to the province to also declare a state of emergency provincially?
Yes.
And so from the city's perspective, did it consider that the province wasn't doing enough to be engaged in the issues and to help resolve it?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it as that. I would characterize it the province, clearly through the Solicitor General, felt that this is a law enforcement matter that could be dealt with through existing authorities that law enforcement have, and that the police should be working together to deal with the resources and what they need under their existing powers to resolve this. That was the initial feedback we received from them.
I understand that approximately 34 vehicles were towed in the zone between January 28th and February 14th, and some limited amount of towing took place outside of the zone during the same period. Does that sound about right to you?
It sounds right, yeah.
All right. To your knowledge, none of those tow trucks were damaged by protesters. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of any damage, but I believe they were light vehicles that were being towed.
Sure. To your knowledge, none of the tow truck operators were assaulted by protesters. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of any, no.
All right. Some parking tickets were issued to illegally parked protest vehicles during the same time period. To your knowledge, none of the bylaw enforcement or police officers issuing these tickets were assaulted by protesters, were they?
I think there was one incident where they were, surrounded, but I'm not aware of any other incidents. That's better put to the police. I wasn't aware of
They
that.
were simply surrounded and not assaulted.
I don't know the details.
Okay, you're not personally aware of that
No.
incident. All right.
We also know that it's substantially interfered with a lot of the public services, garbage pickup, correct?
Yes?
The fire trucks had difficulty getting downtown.
Yes?
We heard about one incident with the Chateau Laurier, that fire trucks couldn't get to them. You were aware of that event?
That's actually not true.
It wasn't true.
No.
Really?
No, one fire truck couldn't get it, but there were fire trucks that got there from other routes. We have contingencies built in for all our emergency operations, so the fire response actually did arrive. That particular truck that was witnessed couldn't get through, but we don't send fire trucks from just one location. We send it from multiple places.
Well, sure, the general manager of the Chateau Laurier will find your evidence interesting, Mr. Kanellakos. Now, what about the gas truck underneath the Rideau Center? That was a serious risk and danger, correct?
I don't agree with that assessment.
It wasn't a risk or a threat to have a truck of fuel in an underground parking lot. That wasn't.
You described it as a serious threat. The truck was removed. I don't characterize it in that kind of urgency.
Well, you can review the emails yourself, sir. I believe the Rideau Center did believe it was quite a risk and a threat.
I can't speak for the Rideau Center.